Okay. So my name is Elizabeth Schuman. I'm the Global Education Manager here in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. And today we are going to talk a little bit about the Panama Agriculture and Sustainability Program. My next slide button didn't work. Okay. So joining me today, I forgot to update the slide. That's right. We'll start with Dr. H, and then Francis, you can introduce yourself as well. We've got our two resident directors who are the faculty and staff that will be traveling with the program.
All right, I'm Dr. H, so I'll be leading the program. Francis is joining us this year, and I'll primarily teach most of the class over the 14 weeks in the fall, with Francis joining in as she sees fit.
Okay, I'm muted. Hi, I'm Frances Baez. I am a PhD student in soil science with Dr. Ippolito, who is my advisor. And yeah, right now I work as a GTA with soil sciences course, the ENR 3000 with Dr. Tania Hernandez Burgos. And yeah, I'm very excited about this opportunity and working with Tiffany next semester. So thank you.
So before we dive in a little bit to some of the details about the program, I like to start by just kind of covering, why you might want to consider studying abroad. I mean, obviously you're already thinking about it because you're here, but we've seen a lot of great data come out in recent years about the skills that students develop through a study abroad program, particularly related to kind of their future careers and what employers are looking for. So you can kind of see that 90% of employers look for skills that are enhanced through study abroad. And those would be things like self-reliance and problem solving, confidence, global competencies like communication and intercultural skills. So there's a lot of good connections between what study abroad can do for your career, as well as just kind of academically expanding your learning, to think about, in this case, agriculture and sustainability within the context of a different country. It's also great for meeting other students on campus. You might meet students you wouldn't have met otherwise. You'll get connected with your resident directors that are leading the program. They're going to be with you for about a week. Pretty much straight. And so they're going to get to know you really well. So that can come in handy down the road when maybe you need a letter of recommendation. And it's fun. There's lots of great experiences and fun memories that you'll make. So for this program, the travel dates are currently January 2nd through January 10th. We might adjust the dates a little bit. We're kind of working with the airline and the provider just based on kind of what our land package was looking at like, but essentially we will be leaving the US on January 2nd, and then we'll either be coming back the 10th or the 9th, and classes resume on January 11th. So we're also kind of looking at, should we give you a little cushion there to recover before you have to dive into the spring semester. We do have a group flight arranged for this program. So what that means is everybody will be traveling on the same flight along with your resident directors here to and from the Columbus airport. So you'll be responsible for getting yourselves to the Columbus airport, and then the group will travel together to and from Panama. And so you should expect to and plan to travel on that group flight with the group. So kind of what our program looks like in country. So we fly into and out of Panama City. And then over the course of the week that you're there, you'll kind of make your way west over to Boquete. We usually have stops in El Valle and Las Lajas. And then from Boquete, and actually from David, which you can see is just a little bit south, you'll fly back to Panama City at the end of the trip before you fly back to the US. So we do spend a lot of time visiting farms and kind of rural locations that are kind of on uneven terrain. We will do some city tours, particularly in Panama City, that'll be more, paved walkways, might be a lot of outdoor activities. So probably I would say the majority is going to be outside compared to inside, and any given tour usually lasts a couple of hours. And then our transportation between cities and to our sites will all be on a private bus, like a private coach. But some of those drives, nothing will be the 8 hours that is on this map that I couldn't get to disappear. Although I wonder if AI could do that for me. I bet if I put this into AI and asked it, they could get rid of that little time block. So you will not have one 8 hour drive, but you will have, maybe, a few hours at a time between those different sites. And we'll break down into like what it looks like in each city in a minute. But is there anything you wanted to add before I move on? No. Okay. So we start in Panama City. And so here, we're getting to see the city. You'll do a walking tour of kind of the old town or the downtown. And the big thing here is visiting the Panama Canal corridor. So seeing the locks and seeing how the ships transit through the locks. We usually see a video about how that works. And then there's a little boat tour on Guantan Lake. We're also looking into, and this hasn't been confirmed, but trying to do a briefing with like U.S. Embassy staff or USDA staff to just get a little bit more insight into agriculture in Panama and how the U.S. Collaborates, I guess, for lack of a better word, with Panama in regards to trade and agriculture. And then usually we'll visit a produce farm kind of as we head out of Panama City to our next stop.
I'll say for this stop in Panama City, we do actually go on the Panama Canal, Gatun Lake in a small boat, but it is next to the large cargo carriers. So at the locks, hopefully we get to watch a ship transit the locks, which is really just using water and gravity to move the ships up and down through the locks. And then there's an IMAX special with Morgan Freeman. And what the picture you see up in the upper left corner is the size of the boat that we would be on the lake. So it's safe. And on that, we often see monkeys, lizards within the confines of the boat. We don't get off on the lake, but it's just a fun time. It's about a 2-hour boat trip that we do out there.
The next stop in years past has been El Valle. So here we kind of visit a little amphibian conservation center, a butterfly haven, and then it is very much my understanding a walk, not a hike, to a small little waterfall. And that's kind of just a stop in the drive, really.
Yeah, it's not a hike, people. It's fully paved and you just walk in this little waterfall. Panama does have many waterfalls. This one is just more of a touristy in the mountain area, which El Valle is kind of like halfway between Panama City and Las Lajas. So we usually just stop to stay overnight there to break the drive up.
Mm-hmm. The next big stop is in fact Las Lajas. So here's where we get to see the Brahman cattle. So those cows with the big hump. It's also where we'll do a service learning project. We'll visit with the local indigenous community, and then usually we visit a palm farm.
So the Brahman cows are always popular. We actually go to a farm where they are just show cows, so they are massaged and bathed daily. The photo in the lower left is when we visit the indigenous village, we actually go to the house of the chief and his family. They cook lunch. They have pretty much a vegetarian diet. So on that leaf, they serve it on banana leaves. And it is a rice with vegetables, like root vegetables that we have. The upper photo is we did a service learning project at a senior citizen home. So they're dancing with the people that are there. Half of them, not half of them, I said a portion of them are retired dancers of the traditional Panamanian dance. And so students get an opportunity to actually dance with them.
And then our last stop on the trip is Boquete, and here's where we visit kind of a coffee farm and a horse farm.
Yeah, here this year they had goats they've added goats to the horse farm. It was completely random, but students, you can feed the goats. The lower left photo is at the coffee farm. So you'll get to see the actual trees, and then you'll see the harvesting part of it, and then you get to do a coffee tasting if you like coffee. I do not, but it smells great. And then there was a Coffee and Flower Festival in Boquete. We spent 2 nights there, so you have a little free time in there to kind of wander the city, do some shopping. But yeah, that the horses, that picture looks like it could be AI, but it is absolutely exactly how the sky looks, and the horses are super friendly. This was with the pregnant mares, and students, you can actually go out and take photos with them.
So that's pretty much what the in-country program has typically looked like in years past. We're still working on finalizing the itinerary for this year, so there could be some adjustments, but that's what we're looking at generally for the upcoming year. For this program, so any student that is accepted into the program will need to enroll in the course associated with the trip, which is FAS 3797.05. So it is a 4-credit class that will meet throughout the fall semester. So right now it's scheduled to meet on Mondays from 5:15 to 7:45 in the evening. It does fulfill the lived environments theme in the GE. And because it is that 4-credit high impact practice course, it fulfills the full requirement. So instead of having to take 2 3-credit classes, you can do this one 4-credit class and be done with that requirement. You cannot enroll in it now. So as you're planning out your fall schedule, you can't enroll in the course until you've been accepted into the study abroad program. So I would say, if you want to apply to the program and you want to do this, just make sure that you have that space available in your schedule for fall. Or if you want to go ahead and enroll in a class that you would take. If you don't get into the program, that's fine. Just kind of know what you would drop and make sure that you'll have those Monday evenings free for the class if you are accepted. Anything you want to add about kind of the class, what it looks like, what you guys cover?
Within the class, you'll be assigned a group and you work on a project, which is the bulk of your grade for the in-class part in Columbus. And students are assigned, they get to select from culture, food, agriculture, obviously, sustainability. There's another area that I am missing. So you get to select which one you'd like to be in, and then I'll group you. We also do some basic Spanish language skills so that you'll be comfortable in a restaurant. So ordering at a restaurant, as we navigate west in Panama, we are going to hit more rural areas where a lot of times there's not a lot of English spoken, which is also why we have Francis to help us. But we'll cover things like that just so you are comfortable in that environment. So it's a pretty low stress class. You will be responsible for keeping a journal as we travel about your thing. And then there's 2 3-page papers, one before we go to Panama and then one when we come back from it. Questions about that?
We can also have some time for questions here at the end. Okay, so this kind of goes back to some of my early comments about how study abroad can really be helpful in kind of that career readiness aspect. I'm not going to go into this in depth, but we will bring the career advisors into your class in the fall semester at some point to kind of talk through what are some of those skills that you develop in study abroad, or how best to leverage your study abroad in your career search, and kind of highlighting what you gain and kind of being prepared to notice that throughout the trip. But these are some of those skills that maybe aren't always obvious that you might want to think about because you can develop them through study abroad. So things like budget management, so it's kind of a life skill. It might not be something that goes into your career, but it could be depending on what you're thinking about. But as you're planning for and considering studying abroad, you're going to have to think through, how much is this going to cost? How am I going to pay for it? What are the scholarships that I currently get, or the funding sources that I have? How much extra money will I need? How am I going to access those funds? So that's a skill that you would go through and kind of develop with study abroad that can kind of play a role in later in life for you. And then again, here are some of those career readiness things. So kind of like networking here is maybe a good example for, something that you could practice or work on in the program, thinking about who you're going to be interacting with or potentially connecting with while you're traveling throughout Panama. How do you want to present yourself or introduce yourself? And then how are you going to follow up with those people that you meet, and kind of nurture those connections over the course of the next few years while you're finishing up here at Ohio State and getting into your profession, and how are you going to navigate that? And that's something that our career advisors will talk about. But just some things I wanted you to kind of think through, and be aware of, and know that there are conversations that are going to be happening throughout the experience as well. Into some more of the logistics. So for this program, we will stay in hotels throughout the trip. They're typically double occupancy rooms, so you should anticipate having a roommate. Everybody will have their own bed. That is a requirement that we make of all the hotels that we stay in. If you are ever studying abroad in an Ohio State program and you walk into a hotel room and there are not 2 beds for you and your roommate, you should tell somebody, because that is not what was intended to happen. But do anticipate that and be thinking and kind of expect that throughout the program, that you'll be rooming with another OSU student participating on the program. Typically for this program, we do try and include all of the meals. So usually it starts with dinner on the day that you arrive in Panama City through breakfast on the day that you leave. You can expect, 3 meals on those other days to all be included in the trip. So it's really just having to look at, the meals on your travel days is what is not included. There might be 1 or 2 meals. Like I think 2 years ago, there was 1 lunch that wasn't included on a free day. But for the most part, your meals will be included in the program fee. So we are working on finalizing the 2026 program fee. I do anticipate that it will be higher than it has been in the past, just due to some changes in the funding that we have for the program. In 2025, the program fee was $2,918. We're hoping to keep it somewhere in the $3,000 range this year, but it will probably be in the high $3,000 range. And last year that included your round trip airfare to and from Columbus, the accommodations in country, so like all your housing, most of the meals in country, all of the transportation within Panama, and then all your activities, and then the international accident and sickness insurance that all is a requirement for all study abroad participants at Ohio State. What was not included in the program fee last year was getting to and from the Columbus airport, those meals on travel days, and personal expenses. So things like if you wanted to buy souvenirs, any pre-trip medical costs, if you need to get a passport, those types of things. There is currently a breakdown of the 2025 costs on the program brochure. We'll update that with the 2026 costs as soon as those are available. And anybody that has attended the info session today, I'll send out an email when we have those costs updated as well. But hopefully we'll have those updated here, I would say by the end of May at the latest. Hopefully more like early to mid-May would be my goal. You'll also see on that program fee, there's a breakdown for the out-of-pocket expenses. So the things that are not included in that program fee, but the things that you realistically might have to spend money on and should budget for. We do budget high for those out-of-pocket expenses, and we do that partially because the cost sheet is, in addition to being a tool to help you understand your costs, also something that financial aid uses to try and adjust cost of attendance when students need that to incorporate the study abroad costs into their budget for the year at the university. And so we always want to give them a higher budget. Plus, we would rather tell you that you're going to spend more than you actually do than underestimate those costs for you. But so I tried to give some ranges for what you might actually expect. So like the meals not included in the program fee. So those meals at the airport, maybe it's more like $30 to $50, depending on, if you're at the airport, are you just going to go pick up a snack, or are you going to sit down, have a nice meal, that type of thing. Same thing with immunizations. I didn't want to necessarily go all the way down to 0 here, but I think it's probably fair that many of you might not have to spend anything on immunizations. There's nothing required to enter Panama for a U.S. citizen, but depending on your personal medical history, there might be some, maybe you need to update your tetanus shot or something like that. And I'll have Dr. H speak to her experience here in a minute with that. But then things like personal expenses, a cell phone, if you're at a like $12 a day travel plan, that's what's in that personal expense line item at 108. There are also some new great eSIM options that can really bring down that cost. If you already have a passport, you wouldn't need to purchase another passport. So that could be as low as 0. US citizens don't need any type of visa or pre-approval to enter Panama. So there's nothing for that line item. But the one thing we don't have on here is personal expenses for like if you forgot your toothpaste or you want to buy souvenirs. So that's why I added like $50 there. But I would say I don't know that a lot of students necessarily spend all that much. But do you want to tell us kind of what you've heard from previous students?
I'll say with the immunizations, I have my doctor. I was like, hey, this is where I'm going. I didn't require any additional ones, just made sure I was up to date on my tetanus shot. But some students are like, oh, I have my doctor said yellow fever. I am not a medical professional. I have a PhD, not an MD, but I'm just from my experience, no one needed the yellow fever. As far as shopping, things are relatively inexpensive as far as souvenirs. A lot of times, I'm looking around my office, we bring back, I'm going to say on average, maybe I spend coffee is the most expensive. When we go to the coffee farm, you can actually buy coffee. I usually bring coffee back for my whole family. I want to say each bag is roughly like $20 or something. But as far as like genuine type of Panama stuff, maybe $100 total. Or we cannot serve alcohol at the meals. The beverages that are provided with our meal are non-alcoholic. But if you took $200, like I don't even know that you would spend it all unless you went shopping or something. It's just one, we're not in a lot of touristy areas outside of Panama City. So we're buying stuff from local suppliers, or in Boquete, they actually have like the tourist shops and things. But even there, I got a tote bag. It was like $25. So stuff's not terribly expensive. Food is not like ice cream. So things like that don't require a lot. Airport food is notoriously prohibitively expensive. Starting off, we usually have an early, like 6 a.m. flight. So I always just bring like a little cheese board or something so I don't have to buy food in the airport. But questions around that?
And we'll have time for questions too at the end. I think I've only got a few more slides here. Just some notes on scholarships. So there is a decent amount of scholarships here at the university. You can use financial aid towards the cost of a study abroad program because this program would be part of your autumn semester. Most of the typical aid that you get from the university is probably going towards paying those usual costs you have for the fall semester, but you can apply for additional study abroad specific scholarships. So I've got a link to OIA's kind of full list of grants and scholarships. And then I've also highlighted a few as well. So any student that is part of CFAES, we do have specific study abroad scholarship funding. You do have to apply. So there is a new application in Scholarship Universe. We just moved our application over there this past year. So there is a specific cycle that just opened. What day would have that been? It was last week, right? April 1st, Thursday, Wednesday? I don't know. Last week, it just opened last week for winter break. So this is the cycle. If you are going to apply for the Panama program, you need to apply to this current CFAS Study Abroad Scholarship application cycle that is now open in Scholarship Universe. The deadline for that cycle is June 10th. So you've got plenty of time. We do have a pretty high award rate in the college. So 90% of the students that apply for study abroad specific funding typically receive something. And for winter break, those awards generally range from $1,000 to $2,000. We also have, if you're part of Honors and Scholars, there's academic enrichment grants through them. The undergraduate student government also has academic enrichment grants. The Gilman Scholarship is a scholarship for students that either receive or a Pell Grant as part of their financial aid package or considered Pell eligible. Or there's a subset of Gilman called the Gilman-McCain for students that are child or spousal dependents of active duty military members. You do not need to have a Pell Grant for the McCain. That's a larger scholarship. So it's a national scholarship. So it's a little bit more competitive than anything you might see on campus. But if you meet those eligibility criteria, I'm happy to talk to you more about Gilman. It's a good scholarship to start with because those are going to be the most in-depth applications you have to write. So, rate your Gilman scholarship applications and then just pull out the parts you want to use for all of your other scholarship applications. There's also the OIC scholarships. These are specifically for Ohio residents. So you do have to be a resident of Ohio to apply for those OIC scholarships, but they've got specific funding for short-term programs like this. They are all housed by the University of Toledo, but you do not have to attend the University of Toledo to apply for them, so long as you are an Ohio resident. And then, of course, if you are part of the STEP program, you can use your STEP funds for this study abroad experience, or if you're part of other colleges here at Ohio State. Kind of highlighted some of the bigger ones, but OIA's grants and scholarship page has links to any college-specific scholarships as well. And then lastly, OIA also has study abroad specific funding. They will have an application cycle that will open in September and close in October for students that are participating in winter break programs. So something to remember and go back to in the fall when you return to campus if you end up applying for the program. The biggest note I'll make about scholarship funding is the timeline is not great. So this program, our application deadline is June 9th. So you'll probably hear back from us about whether or not you've been accepted by early July. And then you'll have 10 days to decide whether you want to commit to the program or if you want to decline your acceptance. Once you commit to the program, you get into the cancellation policy. So if you need to withdraw for whatever reason, there will be a financial penalty to withdrawing. But you are not going to hear back about most of your scholarships until after that commitment deadline. So like, if you look at the, OIA Global Education Scholarships, like their application doesn't even open until September, but you have to make that decision on whether or not you're going to commit in July. So we will notify students about the CFAES study abroad scholarships before you have to commit, but that might likely be the only scholarship that you're getting when you have to make that decision. So you kind of need to be thinking through and planning for what is the plan if I get scholarship funding? What is the plan if I don't get scholarship funding? Do you have access to additional loans that you would take out? Do you have savings that you would use to pay for this? What are kind of your payment options? And what are you comfortable with exploring on any of those, knowing that if you get the scholarship funding, maybe it just means that you don't have to dip into your savings or you don't have to use those loans. But that's a reality of a decision you're going to have to make. In terms of eligibility, it's pretty open for this program. You just have to have an approximate cumulative GPA of a 2.5. If you're kind of on that bubble, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to kind of tell you more about how we review GPAs and what may be considered within reason and how we look at that. The program is open to students from all majors and students from all campuses. We can facilitate some kind of Zoom options for the class if you don't attend the Columbus campus. And then the other big thing is that you have to meet OIA's general eligibility requirements and conditions for participation, which I've linked both of those there. Pretty much a fancy way of saying you need to be in good standing with the university. You cannot study abroad if you're on disciplinary probation and the dates of your probation overlap with the dates of travel. And then you also just have to be responsive to us when we reach out and say, hey, we need this document. We need you to do this form or sign this thing. You actually have to do that. So that's the eligibility. The application, as I mentioned, the deadline is Tuesday, June 9th. That will be at 11:59 p.m. on June 9th. So you'll have all day to work on that application. We generally go home around 5 p.m. So if you are working on the application at 11:30 at night and you have some technical issues, don't panic. Send me an email. I won't respond to you that evening. I'll be asleep, but in the morning I will follow up with you and we'll get it figured out. You apply through the program brochure. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that brochure page, you'll see the Apply Now button. The application is pretty straightforward. It's mostly documents to sign and say that you've read and agree to the document. You do need to upload a copy of your advising report, which you can pull off Buckeye Link. And then it's not really a personal statement. It's an applicant questionnaire that asks you about 4 short answer questions. Why do you want to do this program? How's it going to help you meet your academic and professional goals? How are you going to be a good representative of Ohio State abroad? You don't have to write a whole novel. I think there is a character limit, but you do want to give us a good solid paragraph. So as we're reviewing applications, You know, your advising report and the responses to those questions are really all that we know about you. So telling us enough that we get a sense of who you are and why you're interested in this program is important for kind of helping us make those admissions decisions. Particularly if we were in a situation where we had more applicants than we had seats on the program, which is not common for this program. We are usually right in the high teens range, which is perfect. There is a $150 application fee that you need to pay when you go to submit your application. You'll pay that with a debit or credit card. And then there is a submit button. So as you're filling out the application, once you finish all of the required forms, a nice green banner comes across the screen and says, "Great job, you've done all the requirements." Underneath that banner is the submit button. So particularly if you're working on your application on a phone, it's really easy to miss that submit button. So make sure you scroll down and click submit. And then that is pretty much what I've got. We will open it up if either of our resident directors has anything else to add, or we will open it up for questions. And it's a small group, so feel free to just come off mute and ask questions, or if you're more comfortable, you can put them in the chat as well. I will stop the recording for this part.